Kia ora koutou, it's Chris Eichbaum, and you're listening to the Political Pulse. That's our weekly program where we reflect on issues of politics, policy, what's going on in the world, and there's an awful lot going on in the world, isn't there? So here we are in Masterton and coming out to you on Arrow FM at 92.7. And what's been happening? Well, yesterday we found out that that long list of noughts that we had around COVID-19 cases came to an end. And it came to an end with two cases, as we now know. If you've been reading the papers, listening to the radio, of course you always listen to this radio, so you wouldn't be listening to any other radio station, you'd know that we have now two cases, and the problematic nature of those cases is that they involved two people who drove apparently from Auckland to Wellington under very difficult circumstances for them, because I think it was a family bereavement. They had come to New Zealand from the United Kingdom via Brisbane, and they, I think, went into quarantine around the 6th of June and then had a dispensation to travel south. And the unfortunate thing is that they weren't tested and subsequently were, and were found both to be positive. So this is not a criticism of them, but it's obviously an indication of a systems failure. And clearly politicians have been reflecting on that. Obviously the Minister of Health is not at all happy. And the expression that's used when officials fail in some respects is that they are invited in for a please explain. So there's a please explain going on in respect of that particular issue and how it came to be that two folk managed to be released from quarantine, and then we are told drove non-stop from Auckland to Wellington without engaging with anybody in the course of that trip. Well, so that's what's been going on that front. In other respects, we've been enjoying, I must say, the move back to lockdown level 1. It's been lovely to shake hands with people, to give some people a hug. It was nice to turn up at the Masterton Farmers Market on Saturday morning and to greet old friends, and hugs were exchanged and handshakes were exchanged, and that was nice. That was pleasant. Now, what about today? Well, the next 4 episodes on the Political Pulse are going to look ahead at an event that's coming up on the 19th of September this year, and that event is the election. Now, we're not going to be looking at that event in the context, for the next 4 weeks anyway, of the party vote or the electorate vote. We're going to be looking at it because this year's election, we're going to be given the choice as citizens to exercise voice our preferences regarding two very significant policy issues. One relates to the whole question of the end of life, circumstances under which it may be lawful for someone to elect, given the nature of their physical ailment, well-being, to end their life. The second issue relates to cannabis law reform, and we're going to be asked to indicate whether or not we agree with a piece of legislation going through the Parliament which will essentially decriminalise, legalise cannabis and cannabis use on the part of private citizens. Now, we're going to be talking with folk who favour legislative reform, change, and we're going to be talking with folk who do not. And the first person we're going to be talking to is Carly Mercier, who is with the New Zealand Drug Foundation. Are you there, Carly?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Good morning, and welcome. It's great to be able to talk to you. I'm with the assistance of the wonderful people here, Michael Wilson at RFM. I'm just mastering the technology, so I think you may have called earlier and I may have missed the call, so my apologies for that. So for the listeners, Carly is the Policy and Advocacy Manager with the New Zealand Drug Foundation. And so for today and next week, we're going to be looking at that referendum issue around reform of the cannabis law, and that's going to invite citizens in one of the two referenda, and the one that we're talking about is going to have a question, and the question's going to say, do you support the proposed cannabis legislation and control bill? And the options are going to be yes, I support the proposed cannabis legislation and control bill, and no, I do not support the proposed cannabis legislation and control bill. Now, the New Zealand Drug Foundation has adopted a policy position, and some of you may have seen television advertisements, and it's very clearly in support of the yes vote on this particular referendum. And for that reason, we've invited the Drug Foundation, and Carly Mercier has been kind enough to join us today to talk through the issue. So Carly, welcome again. Thanks for taking the time. Let's start with the New Zealand Drug Foundation, just so we're orienting ourselves. What's the New Zealand Drug Foundation?
Right, yeah. So we are a charitable trust. We've been around for about 30 years, and we were established by 2 doctors and a nurse. And we're an independent charity, so we do get a large chunk of our money from the government, but we're independent, and we get money from elsewhere as well. For example, the money we've spent on this campaign. We're a very strongly evidence-based public health-focused organisation, and our goal is to reduce the harm that drugs cause in New Zealand. So we're not a pro-drug or anti-drug organisation. We don't encourage drug use at all, but we do accept the reality that people have always used drugs and will likely always use them. So we don't judge that, but instead we do various interventions to try and reduce the harm that can cause for some people. And we do that sort of different ways. So, for example, helping people reduce their use of a substance. We produce materials, or helping them identify when their use is becoming problematic. And we also do work to help ensure that products people are using are less likely to kill them. For example, we do drug checking. We have a machine that can check drugs to see whether they're, what's actually in the things that people are about to use. And we do that at festivals over the summer. And we work with the government on policy approaches to reducing the harm that drugs can cause, and we work with schools to create programs that help reduce drug use over time. And we work with workplaces as well on policies that can help them minimise the harms that drugs cause in their organisations. So we do a whole range of different work around drug use and trying to reduce that harm.
Okay, that's great. So it's fair to say then that the overall approach of the Drug Foundation in respect of, say, cannabis is to approach the issue from broadly a health perspective. Would that be an appropriate way of characterising it?
Yeah, we'd call it an evidence-based public health approach. And so over the 30 years that we've been working in the space, our policy on drug law reform has kind of evolved in time with what's happening around the world and what's happening in New Zealand. And we've really got to the point now where we have a 3-plank policy on drug use in general. And one is that we would like to see the decriminalisation of all drug use, which means that people who are using drugs were not punished in the criminal justice system for that use, but rather were given a health intervention. Excuse me. And part of our position also is that cannabis is our most frequently used drug in New Zealand, illicit drug that is, and is one that has quite low levels of harm compared to other drugs. We think that should go the step further and be legally regulated. I can talk more about why we think that in a minute. And the third plank of our policy is that we think there should be better investment in health care around drug use, so prevention, education, harm reduction and treatment. So that's the policy approach we're taking, and it took us a long time to get to the point of thinking, yes, we should legalise cannabis and just come out and say it, and then a bit longer again to decide that we would actually promote a yes vote in the referendum. But we feel really comfortable that we've got to a position of thinking that's absolutely the right thing for us to be doing. There's no other major organisation coming out and leading a campaign, so it was really important that that information was getting out to the population around why it's important to legalise from our perspective.
Okay, so the referendum question is about the bill, okay? So it's the proposed cannabis legislation and control bill. I had a quick look online. This looks like a very weighty, literally, piece of legislation. Yes. There's a lot there. I mean, I don't know, 155 plus sections. So it's a big ask, I know. But can you distill down for us the essence of what the bill actually proposes to do if it were to be implemented?
Yeah, do you want the short answer or the long answer?
Well, let's go for the medium one, the one in the middle.
So the main thing is that the bill has a purpose of reducing harm from cannabis use in New Zealand. So the thing that it really tries to do is to put controls around cannabis use and cannabis growing and production of products and selling of those products, to put controls around what is actually an existing market in New Zealand. So it's not trying to create a new market, it's trying to control the market that's already existing. And one of the purposes would be that harm would be reduced over time. So those people who do suffer from using cannabis, which is a small minority, but they can have some quite bad health outcomes, there would be a real focus in trying to reduce that harm. Young people, for example, people who use heavily or who use frequently. The bill tries to reduce will try and it sets a cap on the total amount of cannabis that can be produced, and over time, the idea is that this cap would get smaller and smaller, so that would be producing less cannabis, and that would be done in line with the reducing demand that we'd also see. So the bill puts, for example, taxes on cannabis sales, and a portion of that tax has to go towards a drug harm reduction strategy. So there will be an authority which will be responsible for setting a policy for how we're going to reduce the harm that cannabis causes in New Zealand. For example, education programs, prevention work, harm reduction, and also treatment programs in communities, especially those that particularly suffer from cannabis and other substance use. And so money will be taken from taxes and put directly into that health program. So the bill, what else does it do? It sets a strict age 20 limit on sales. So you can't, work in a cannabis shop or even rock up to a cannabis shop if you are under 20. There'll be stores, standalone cannabis stores, so they won't be able to sell any other products. You'll only be able to buy cannabis at those stores. You won't be able to get it at supermarkets like alcohol, for example, or in dairies like tobacco. It's actually, interestingly, a much stricter model of public health regulation than either we have for tobacco or alcohol, which is really cool. In fact, I would say it's a model of public health regulation in terms of the way they've put controls in place to make sure that harm stays low and reduces over time. What else? You can only have a growing or a selling license. You can't have both. So there'll be restrictions on the total amount grown, and there'll be a portion of those licenses set aside for small-scale growers. The purpose for that is that people who are already in the illicit market and supplying the illicit market are usually small scale, and the dream scenario would be that they come over to the legal market because that will reduce the black market. And so they would start paying taxes, and the cannabis that they're selling anyway would then, be quality controlled and go through quality processes to make sure that the product's good and that, they're paying taxes and so on. What else? If there'll be a homegrown limit, so you'll be able to grow 2 plants at your house, or up to 4 plants if there's 2 adults or more in the house, which is good for a minority of people who do want to grow. I think we've seen in Canada and America that very few people do actually end up doing that if they've got the option of getting a really good supply legally. They don't really bother. It's a bit like growing your own tomatoes. Some people will do it because they really enjoy doing it, but it's probably still cheaper to get it at the supermarket overall. Then what else? There'll be consumption only at home or in a licensed venue. You won't be able to consume on the street or in the park or at the beach at all. Yep.
That's great. So the selling proposition from the Drug Foundation in terms of the advertising promotional material that's coming across is that this is sort of our choice. It's not modelled on anyone else. So in what way is what's proposed in New Zealand different?
Well, if you look at the way they've legalised in America, for example, a number of states there have legalised, and they did it from a really different perspective. They did it from the perspective of criminal justice. Outcomes from cannabis legalisation were horrific over there. They're pretty bad here too, but they were even worse over in America. And so the main goal for them for legalisation was mostly to reduce that harm that criminalisation of cannabis was causing to black and minority people. And so the legislation that was put in place was all about trying to stop that harm. It wasn't about trying to promote public health. So they didn't put in place, for example, rules around advertising. They didn't think about trying to set up the market so that it would encourage small-scale illicit current producers into the legal market either. And so they didn't put rules around products, for example. So you can buy pretty much any kind of cannabis product there, and the result is that you have a proliferation of really interesting products, and people are therefore more likely to be encouraged to try them. We're not going to do that here. What we've seen from America is that we don't want people to be encouraged. We don't want cannabis market to look interesting and fun. It should look as boring as possible, and it should be as unnormalised as possible. So what we've got, for example, here is that you won't even really be able to see clearly where the shops are. The shop would be able to put a cannabis leaf on the outside of its shop, but that will be about it. They won't be able to advertise, or they won't be able to display their products or anything in a way that you can see it from the street. So we've put a lot of thought into trying to make it really unappealing for young people. You won't be allowed any products that appeal to young people. We've put a lot of thought into preventing all forms of advertising, sponsorship, freebies, and so on. So we've learned from other countries, and we've learned from our own mistakes as well with alcohol and tobacco around advertising and things like that as well.
Right. One of the products, and folk can go online and obviously see what's happening in some of the states within the United States, or Canada for that matter. But one product you can buy are these sort of sweets, jelly babies, sort of, which clearly are infused with, I don't know, THC or something. So does the New Zealand regime preclude those kinds of uses, those sorts of products being available on the market?
Yeah, so any product that would appeal to children are automatically ruled out. There is the possibility over time that you might get some kind of lozenge or gummy that would appeal only to adults, because that's actually quite a good way for some people to use cannabis rather than smoking. So you've got this thing where smoking's not great for you, so you want to encourage people over to using products that don't include smoking, but you also don't want to create too many different products because it makes the market look more attractive to novel users. So it's trying to strike that balance, and the way the bill does that is quite clever. It says that from the get-go, any dry or fresh cannabis that fits the quality standards that they set and the potency levels that they set, that will be automatically approved. And then after that, any other products that people may wish to sell will have to go through an approval process individually, and they'll have to show that they are not going to appeal to children and that there's a good harm reduction reason for introducing those products. So I think that's kind of a good balance of letting products into the market that might be useful to stop people smoking, but also not allowing a big proliferation of products that could get out of control.
Okay, one of the arguments against, I think, any liberalisation, decriminalisation, whatever, is that the cannabis could be an entry-level drug. So, you start off with a joint, next thing, suddenly you're using, whatever, other illicit, illegal, and obviously incredibly damaging drugs. What's your response to this notion that this is a kind of a staircase, if you like, and if you legalise access to that first step, you're actually going to facilitate somebody going all the way up or down, as the case may be?
Yeah, so there has been speculation in some studies, although it's not really clear from an evidentiary point of view that it does happen, but it's what we do know is that at the moment people are getting cannabis from an illicit market, and what will often happen when they go to buy it is that they won't be able to get cannabis and they'll be offered something else instead, such as methamphetamine. So in that way, it's not even the cannabis itself which is providing the gateway, it's the fact that cannabis is illegal which is causing that gateway effect, which pushes people towards other substances. So, does cannabis itself cause people to try other things? I don't think so, but and if it does, then no more than alcohol or tobacco would do the same. So, I think that it's the legal status of cannabis that we really have to be concerned about in that respect, not the substance itself.
Okay, and so is one of the objectives behind the bill then that essentially we're going to see a move from provision through, say, what is largely at the moment a black market where, to some degree at least, criminal organisations are significant players, through to a white regulated market which has much more kind of transparency and regulation wrapped around it? Is that one of the arguments?
That would be one of the key arguments, yeah. So over time we'd expect to see more and more people move to the illicit market, and I don't think it would happen overnight. I expect it's a slow process. We've seen in Canada and America that quite a chunk of people have already moved over. Like within a year of legalising in Canada, about 30% of people were getting their cannabis from the legal market, although it's quite hard to actually judge that for various reasons. But it seems that the legal market is very attractive to people, and one way they're going to make the legal market more attractive here is by having price controls. So they'll be trying to set the price at a point that it will make the legal market more attractive than the illicit market. But they don't want to set the price too low because that means that more people might potentially use cannabis. So they're going to try and balance those two competing goals when they set the price here. For most people, they're going to want to buy a legal product that they're already using. And let's be clear, 590,000 people used cannabis in New Zealand last year. That is a huge chunk of people. They will be able to buy cannabis instead of getting who knows what. They'll be able to get a potency-controlled, packaged and labelled product with quality control, so they'll know there'll be no pesticides, they know there'll be no moulds or fungus, which can be quite damaging, especially when you smoke a cannabis product. And there'll be child-proof packaging, and there'll be harm reduction messaging on those packages as well. So what we're doing is we're moving those 600,000 people from a state where we don't know what they're using and how often and where, and we're moving them into a controlled, regulated market where we can actually monitor what's going on. We can control it to a much bigger extent than we currently can, and we can try and reduce any, cannabis-related harms that we do see coming out from the population as a result.
Okay, another argument, I guess, that's advanced is the effects of consuming cannabis products and then doing other things. So we've got an NZTA advertising public health, program on TV at the moment with the placards saying that this person was killed by someone driving a car who was mixing weed and alcohol. What do you have to say to the suggestion that, well, you're going to be providing access, legalising access to this product, but the product may be used inappropriately, someone may drive a car, someone may go to work, injure themselves, injure other people. How do you respond to that kind of comment?
Yeah, sure, and these are valid fears that people have. I mean, my response to that would be that people are already taking cannabis and then driving. They should not be doing that. It's really a bad idea. We know that cannabis can impair motor skills, can affect your attention, can affect your cognitive functions and so on. So you should not drive after using it within, probably 6 hours or so. And we know that cannabis use has been associated with an increased risk of having a car crash as well, although the evidence on whether cannabis causes or is just correlated with car crashes is a bit sketchy. We know that the overseas findings on the effect of cannabis legalisation on road safety are not very good quality, so we can't reliably show whether legalisation in the United States, for example, has affected safety on the roads or not. And in fact, there are studies pointing both ways. So some studies show a small increase in crashes after legalisation. Others show a reduction in crashes, but none of them show a causation because of the legalisation, like that the effects on crashes may have been caused by a number of different things. So the research isn't great on that, but what is clear is that there's no clear increase in crashes after legalisation, according to the research that we have. Also in Canada, we know they've done surveys since legalisation and shown no increase in the number of people who reported driving after using cannabis. So that one's interesting. What that tells me is that realistically, the people who are going to drug drive are probably already doing it. I know that in New Zealand, rates of cannabis use is steadily increasing under prohibition. So we've nearly doubled our use in the past 8 years. So we've got a problem with drug driving in New Zealand, and we need to address that problem, but it's not, in my mind, linked to legalisation and the legal status. It's to do with the fact that more and more people are using it, and they're not seeing that it's a dangerous thing to do. So what we need is better education, better prevention, and better enforcement. And we need more money put into doing that, and that's regardless of whether we legalise or not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, last question, and this one goes to an issue where I think the Drug Foundation has been, your promotional material has been subject to some criticism, and this goes to medicinal cannabis. I have to say that my reading of what's up there and it may be the Electoral Commission, I'm not sure who's responsible for the information that's up there, states that medicinal cannabis is already legal under the medicinal cannabis scheme, so it's not included in the referendum. But my sense is also that there are a lot of practitioners in the complementary medicine area who are, say, currently, possibly technically unlawfully using cannabis products as part of the kind of therapy or the prescribing that they're doing outside the kind of formal kind of registered doctor GP prescription sort of approach. What's your take on that whole issue of the medicinal use of cannabis? Because I suspect that in terms of cannabis consumption in New Zealand, a quite significant part of that will be people using cannabis products for the therapeutic benefits that may well accrue from them.
Yes, and I think the statistic is something like 41% of people using it do report using it for therapeutic reasons or medical reasons. So it's an interesting one because, as you say, medicinal cannabis is legal in New Zealand and has become legal in the past few years. But the problem is that it's not actually accessible for most patients, even though it's legal. And so patient organisations are advocating strongly for a yes vote in the referendum so that they can get better, cheaper access to a full range of products. It's still really expensive. There are very few products available. Many GPs are unwilling to prescribe them. So that's the point of view, that's where they're coming from. And I think one thing we've seen really clearly in Canada and in the United States that have legalised is that their legalisation regime actually leads to a far greater and better access for patients, better pricing, and actually quite often the exact same products are being sold in the adult regulated market as are being sold in the medicinal market, but it pushes prices down overall. So that's a win for cannabis, for patients who are using it. And the other thing is that the great thing about the referendum is that it will allow some home grow, and many patients swear by using the fresh products and juicing them and doing other things to them that make them easier for them to consume. So the type of products that they may not be able to get under the medicinal market as well. So yes, medical cannabis is legal. We're still promoting the referendum as a way for patients to get better access because they're not getting it currently. And we see it really as a human rights issue. People, if they're able, if they find that the product gives them incredible relief for a whole bunch of really debilitating conditions that can cause huge pain and discomfort and misery, and they're currently getting those products under the black market and suffering the risk of prosecution and still being prosecuted that way as well, that has to stop, and legalisation is the best way for that to stop.
Okay. Hey, Kaylee, thanks so much for joining us today and for giving us your perspective and for rehearsing the arguments that are being promoted, disseminated by the Drug Foundation in support of the yes vote. For those people listening, I hope you found that useful. Obviously, you can go online and have a look at the Drug Foundation website. And this isn't about promoting one particular view. Next week, we'll hear from the other perspective, from the, say, nope to dope perspective. There are two sides to this, but all I guess we'd ask is that, and you said it, it's an evidence-based approach, and we'd hope that those who are exercising votes in the referendum also exercise an evidence-based vote. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. Great to talk to you.
Okay, ka kite, take care.
Ka kite.
And that's it for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. As I say, this is the first of 4 programs on the referendums, I think is the way to say it. First 2, looking at the cannabis referendum. Second 2, looking at the whole question of end of life. Thanks for joining us. Have a look, chase down the issues, educate yourself, look at the evidence, and then at the end of the day, this is all about you. This is about your choices, not about mine. You take care out there, and I look forward to joining you again same time next week.